Exposition dumps. Are they good or bad? Should you use them? Hi, I'm Jeshua. We at Deep Dive Publishers help aspiring authors pen, publish, and promote a best-selling book. Now, as soon as you see the word exposition dump, you may have a very visceral reaction because if you have spent any time in any author sphere, basically anywhere in the past decade or even more than that, you've probably heard that exposition dumps are lazy writing, that you shouldn't do it, that it's just bad. And I'm going to start off this video right now and say, I disagree. Exposition dumps can be a good thing. Now, before you get your pitchforks ready and decide it's time for some lynching, let me explain why I feel this way and when I think the exposition dumps are okay. Sure, they're not necessarily optimal. If you wanted to really go for it, you could try to lace every little thing just, a couple of sentences here and there through dialogue and through narration and really, put in the effort to do that. And if you want to do that, that's fine. If you can manage to find a way to structure your story and the information that you're giving away inside your story in a manner that you can do that effectively, then, more power to you. Have fun. But sometimes that's just not necessarily practical or even possible. Sometimes something might come up in the story and you need to give context that your character already has, and the only way you can really do it is either a narrative exposition dump, internal monologue, or a dialogue exposition dump, or really a monologue. Now, I want to present an example that I think does exposition dumps very well and kind of gets to the point of why they're not necessarily bad. They're not evil, they're not good, they're just a tool in the toolbox. They exist, people have been using them for a long time, and I don't think that they should necessarily just die. The book that I would like to reference is Stieg Larsson's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Not just this book, really the whole Millennium trilogy, including The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. Now, of course, there are other books in the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series by other authors, but I've only read the Stieg Larsson original trilogy, and that's what I'm going to be referencing here. Now, the beginning of this book starts off with a bad exposition dump. You should not... This is the one time I think you absolutely should never do this, and that's at the very beginning of your book. The readers don't care yet. They don't know your characters, they don't know your world, they don't know the scenario that's happening, and starting off with multiple pages of backstory stuff is just a surefire way to lose your reader. And unfortunately, this book does start out that way, and when I first began reading it, I remember distinctly in chapter 1 saying to myself, oh god, am I going to be able to finish this? And that's kind of the feeling that you get when you start off in a story that you know nothing about, that you don't care about yet, and then you're just being smacked in the face with, oh yeah, this person back in the day was doing this thing, and then he went off and did this other thing, and none of it's relevant to what's happening right now. That's bad exposition. Once we get past that first exposition dump, however, I must say, this was one of the most compelling books I've ever read. I read about 100 pages a day until I was finished, and then I immediately jumped into book 2, and I read at least 100 pages a day until I finished, and then book 3, same thing. That has never happened to me before or since. This is the only trilogy that has ever managed that. Stieg Larsson, hopefully pronouncing that correctly, ish, it's Swedish, is the only author who's managed to compel me that hard into a book that I, completely of my own volition, just voraciously ate at it. And that comes down to the fundamental crux of your exposition dumps. He really loves his exposition dumps. There are entire chapters where most of what happens is just an exposition dump. Now, how could that be? How can that be compelling? That is the question. That is the fundamental thing. Is the information you're giving your reader interesting? If it's interesting or emotionally compelling, you'll sit there and you'll read it. I happily read the dozens of pages where one or more characters is just sitting there reading old case books, old notes about the disappearing girl, who went missing 50 years ago. That is the whole point of the story, figuring out what happened to her. And there's a lot of it's a cold case. There's a lot of just sitting there, sipping your coffee, reading about stuff that other people figured out half a century ago. And that stuff is interesting because it's information that is critical to the story. It is being processed by the characters, so we see how the characters are viewing this information. We're learning about them and, their level of intellect, because the characters in these books are fairly intelligent for the most part, the main characters at least. And again, fundamentally, it's information that is interesting and important to the story. If they cut out, if Stieg Larsson or his editor had cut out large swaths of them sitting there and just reading the case files or looking through the photographs and what was in those photographs on the day that she went missing, you'd miss out on a lot of the story, really. And that would be a shame. Yes, it does make for a slow pace. That's one thing that a lot of authors are terrified of, and unfortunately a lot of readers and viewers are not cool with, which is a slow pace, a slow burn. This book is a fantastic slow burn. So much happens, yet a lot of it is just very relaxed. There's no immediate danger that anyone is in. And so for a certain type of reader, a certain type of watcher, whatever, medium you're using. We're, of course, a book channel, but you could very well be coming here doing TV or hoping to do that or whatever. More power to you. Hey, hopefully you learned something. But anyway, another thing that actually inspired me originally to make this video was the Netflix show Midnight Mass. And one of the major complaints that people had for that show was the copious amounts of monologuing. Now, yes, there are a lot of monologues. There are scenes that go on for minutes where there's just a person talking at another person. Now, is that realistic dialogue? No. No. A lot of the time in that show, people do not talk like real people talk. But that's not the point. And this is coming from a person who strives to make realistic feeling dialogue and who really appreciates it when dialogue sounds or reads realistic. But the thing is, again, it comes down to, is what they're saying compelling? Now, it can be compelling because the exposition really is, emotionally traumatic, or just something fascinating to do with the background of this person or things that they've done that are relevant, again, to the story. It all needs to be relevant. If you're doing an exposition dump or / monologue, which is a form of exposition dump, really, if you're doing those and it's just about, hey, this is how the chef made the meal that they are eating now, shy away from that, definitely, unless this is the one of the main things about this book is the cooking, because if it's specifically about cooking, and the readers know that this is a book where the food is really important to the story, showing the process of cooking that meal could really engage the readers. That's the thing. So many people make blatant, blanketed statements about, you know, exposition dumps are bad. And yeah, they can be. They can be really boring. I've definitely read my fair share of just like, I don't care. I don't care. Why are we still here? Next page. We're still going for another 4 paragraphs. Jeez, okay. Like, you can go wrong. They can be overdone. Absolutely. There's a reason that people often feel that they simply shouldn't exist. There is a reason people have that opinion. But when they're done well, when they're framed properly, when they're compelling, more power to you. Go ahead. Use the exposition dump. Sometimes they can be very valuable. Brandon Sanderson is one of the most prolific and successful fantasy authors in the modern age. And you know what he does a lot in his books? He exposition dumps. He will spend pages just describing how his magic system works. And you know what? He's, again, one of the most successful and prolific fantasy authors alive today. Now, all of this does come together where you need to have it be good. You know, you can't have a boring exposition dump. Because if you do, you've lost your reader. If you have endless exposition dumps and there's no forward momentum with the plot that or with the characters, you've lost your readership. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. There are a lot of exposition dumps in this book, in the whole trilogy, really. There are a lot of exposition dumps. There are pages and pages and pages of just, okay, this is this character's backstory. And yes, sometimes they get tedious. If you're gonna use them, I'd say a page is as long as you want to make it. Definitely don't go longer than that. Probably keep it a bit shorter than a full page, preferably. You know, it's all about balance. If you give no exposition at all, then your reader has no idea what's going on, and again, you've lost them because they can't follow what's happening. You get too dumpy with your exposition, and people lose interest. And so that is kind of the balancing act that is required. You must make it interesting. It must relate. Preferably, it would be critical information about the plot or the characters or the world that they're involved in, whether it's, sci-fi fantasy, literally an alternate universe, or just the scenario that they're engaged with, this part of, our real world that they're interacting with. If it does, 2 or even 3 of those things, furthering the reader's knowledge of all of that at once, now that can be really compelling because, again, Stieg Larsson, book 3, there are some exposition dumps about some stuff that's been happening and, about the background of the main character, Lisbeth Salander. And at least for me, personally, again, this is all subjective. This is taste. I don't mind the exposition dumps as much as some other people do. And that is also true. There will be people that hate it, even if it's a good exposition dump. But anyway, there are dumps in book 3 that happen that's like, oh yeah, we're now wrapping up those loose ends. Oh yeah, this text block is wrapping up all of those other things that have been building. And it's like, oh, now it all makes sense. And so, really, it comes down to that. Exposition dumps are not good, and they are not bad. They are a tool that you can or cannot choose to use. If you do choose to use them, do not, under any circumstances, start your book with one. Start your book with some action in media res, in the middle of something interesting that's going on, you know? And depending on what genre you're writing in, there are different things that will make sense to start your book with. Maybe it's wrapping up, the last investigation before the cop, the detective gets brought into the new case, or whatever it might be. Maybe a breakup scene between two characters to start your romance. I don't know. I don't write romance. Don't take that idea if it doesn't work for romance. But, start with action and behavior and something going on, preferably something happening. And then as you get further and further into the story, you can drop in the occasional monologue or the occasional just several paragraphs of narrative. Now, some people, as I've said already, some people will hate it for that purpose. But I recommend read Girl with the Dragon Tattoo if you want to see an example of, for the most part, good exposition dumps. They are a bit overdone, but hey, early 2000s, it was a different era. Watch Midnight Mass if you're not super sensitive about a lot of different topics. There's a lot of... It talks smack about a lot of stuff, and there's some pretty brutal things that happen. So definitely caveat, with either of these, trigger warnings for a lot of stuff in either of these things. But hey, I'm not even necessarily recommending you use exposition dumps here. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they exist and you can if you want to. Don't listen to anyone who says that you have to do it this way when it comes to writing fiction. Be it using an outline or not using an outline, or using sparse exposition through everything, or using the occasional exposition dump. It's up to you. There are going to be people who prefer one method over the other. That is always how it's going to be. No matter what you do, there will be people that your book is not for. And so just know your audience. Know what you can and cannot get away with. Know that if you do decide to use exposition dumps or any other tool that people recommend shying away from, but you feel, I don't see why this specific iteration of this tool is bad, go ahead and do it. Go ahead. Try it. Do your best to make it good, because if it sucks, it sucks. But I mean, you can start in media res and never have any exposition dumps at all, and be very careful with drip feeding every piece of information, and focus all on the character development and the plot and the action and being in a scene, showing, not telling almost at all, and your book could still suck. So it really kind of depends on you and the work you're willing to put into it, and less about how you do it. That's just my opinion. I'm an unpublished author. I'm writing a book. Don't you don't necessarily have to quote me on what I'm saying here, and maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, feel free to tell me in the comments on how I'm incorrect on this particular subject. I hope that one of these days, soon enough here, my own work will be ready to be published out into the world, and then you can take your own look and see whether or not I have any business talking about this stuff. This is my opinion, my personal taste, that they're not necessarily evil. Does that mean I use copious amounts in my own work? No, but I probably have a few in there. So be sure to take my opinion with a grain of salt. There have been many AuthorTube people who have built up a massive following, which, of course, I don't have that yet. But they build up this massive following and they give all this writing advice, and then they come out and publish their own book, and it's just, according to many people, just absolute trash. I hope that's not what happens, but it's entirely possible that that's what's going to happen with mine. So, again, I'm not preaching gospel here. I'm just sharing my opinion. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you have a comment disagreeing with what I have to say here, go ahead and leave a comment. Subscribe to get notified of future videos, and go ahead and share this video with your author friends. See you next time.